You are listening to When Life Gives You Lemons, the podcast that speaks to high-performing individuals who have been through adversity but come back stronger. I'm your host, Emma Levy, a physiotherapist who has helped elite athletes on their way to Olympic success. This podcast was born following my own trauma when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in the midst of the global pandemic at the age of just 36. Sat in the chemo chair, I set myself the goal of starting a podcast to explore resilience and the power of mindset. So here we are, season 8, and I'm going to ask you a quick favour. Please press that follow button. And if you can go one step further, write us a review. It really does make a difference. Half of you watching this will get cancer at some point in your lifetime. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And when you've had cancer, you become very passionate about awareness, because awareness and early detection saves lives. So I thought it would be a good idea to tell my story today. Now, I started the podcast back in February 2023, and the last episode of the first season, I told my story. But that was quite close to me having finished treatment for breast cancer, so the episode was really hard to film. I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of emotion in it, my voice was quite shaky, and I also have a lot of new listeners now, so I thought it'd be really good to tell my story again so that my new listeners can listen. If you've listened before, you don't have to listen again, because nothing has changed. For those of you that listen to the podcast, you will have heard me say how exercise saved my life. And this is the first time that exercise really did save my life. It was March 2020, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and I'd just been out for a run. Do you remember those days where you could only go out for 30 minutes a day? I'd been out for my daily run, I came home, and as I was taking off my sports bra, I saw a tiny speck of fluid in my sports bra. And I thought, that's strange. And it reminded me a little bit of when I breastfed. And I'd finished breastfeeding about 9 months before that time. So I thought, that must be related to breastfeeding. Didn't think anything of it. A few days later, I went for a run again and the same thing happened. There was a little bit of what I realised then was nipple discharge. And I thought, this is a little bit worrying. So I phoned the breast clinic, who I'd actually seen 6 months earlier, because my first cousin had had breast cancer younger than 40. So my mum had taken me for a full check, and back 6 months earlier, everything had been normal. So I phoned the breast clinic and they said, come straight in. So I went into the breast clinic and I saw the consultant and I had an ultrasound and a mammogram and everything was normal. And she said, come back in 6 weeks if you still have the nipple discharge. 6 weeks later, I still had the nipple discharge. It wasn't worse, it was tiny little specks. And my husband said, right, make an appointment to go back to the hospital. And I said, absolutely not. This was now the midst of the COVID pandemic when people were dying from being in hospitals. And I don't often listen to my husband, but luckily on this occasion I did listen. And I went back in and they decided to do an MRI. And then they telephoned me and they said, can you come back in for what they called a second look ultrasound? And I didn't know what this would entail when I chose to cycle to my appointment that day, but it actually included a biopsy. So when I was cycling home that afternoon with 3 puncture wounds in my chest, that was one of my low moments. And then the clinic telephoned and they told us to come back in and they told me to bring my husband. And this was another red flag because we were mid-COVID lockdown at the moment, and you were not allowed any visitors in hospital. And I really should have twigged that something was up, but I was so convinced that I was fine that I didn't think anything of it. So we both trundled up to hospital, and that was the appointment where we heard the news that no one ever wants to hear. And I was diagnosed with hormone-driven breast cancer. For those interested, it was estrogen positive and HER positive breast cancer. And I remember 2 things from that appointment. I remember the consultant saying this is fully treatable and fully curable. And I remember looking over at my husband and thinking, oh boy, he's going to faint. Luckily, he didn't faint and he was okay. And we went home that day and we had to tell the family, which was awful. And we were homeschooling the kids, so we were dealing with my eldest son who had undiagnosed ADHD. And we were trying to teach my middle son how to read because he just started school in reception. And we were finding our 1-year-old in the garden eating mud because he was just being ignored. So I realised that this was going to be a tough ride. And so I then started treatment quite quickly, and I started with weekly chemotherapy for 12 weeks. And for chemotherapy, I wore what's called a cold cap, which is basically a freezing cold bucket on your head. And what that does is it freezes the hair follicles with the intention of trying to make you lose as little hair as possible, which I obviously wanted to try and achieve mostly for my children. And it was during chemotherapy that I discovered podcasts, because I would enter the chemo suite, I would put my earbuds in, and I would put on whatever podcast I fancied that day. And during that time, podcasts, they entertained me, they inspired me, they educated me. And a seed was planted that maybe one day I would want to do my own podcast. And throughout chemotherapy, I continued exercise, I continued regular training. And it was when I was exercising that it was the only time I really felt like me. And it was the only time I could take control of something. Because when you're going through cancer treatment, you don't control anything. You're told where to be and when. And so this was the second occasion where exercise saved my life again. I then had, after the chemotherapy, a little time to recover. I then had a double mastectomy and reconstruction, and I was in hospital for 5 days, totally alone, because I wasn't allowed any visitors. You're then given a bit of time to recover again, and I was then told I needed to have daily radiotherapy for 3 weeks. And then I had antibody therapy every 3 weeks for the remainder of the year. And that's basically a 10-minute long intramuscular injection into your thigh. And there's a quite funny story about exercise here. After one of these long injections, I got home and I felt pretty good, so I went for a run. And halfway through that run, I suddenly just could not weight bear. I was in agony in my legs, so I phoned my husband up, and my husband came, picked me up. We phoned the chemo suite. They said, come straight in. We went in, and I remember the chemo nurse saying to me, why did you go for a run? And I said, well, no one told me not to go for a run. So that was how my mind was back then. And exercise really meant so much. I was due to complete the London Triathlon that summer, but because of COVID, it had been cancelled. I deferred the entry, and I actually competed the London Triathlon 1 month following completion of all active cancer treatment. And that was a special feeling, crossing over the line on that day. And like everyone else throughout COVID, I was walking a lot, and I was walking for my recovery as well. And when I was walking with friends, I was thrashing about this idea of a podcast. And there was one particular friend who really gave me the confidence to embark on it. And so it was February 2023 that When Life Gives You Lemons was launched. And throughout the past 2.5 years, I've spoken to over 80 incredible individuals who have also been through their own challenges, their own adversity, but they have used those challenges as fuel, and they have come back stronger than ever before. And so when I went through my cancer and I felt like I was a stronger person after, that was what drove me to want to start the podcast. I wanted to understand why there's some people who are able to use those difficulties and turn it into a strength, an internal fire, which helps us to go and achieve brilliant things. So when I talk about now what I've learned, it's not based solely on me, but it's also based on the conversations that I've had with these multiple individuals who have also been through terrible, challenging times. And so where am I now? Well, if you're listening to this, you know that the podcast is still running. I'm just finishing season 8 of When Life Gives You Lemons, and my intention is to come back in a few weeks with a new season and to talk to many, many, many more amazing people. But I also go out and I do some speaking. So I do professional speaking where I combine my interest of mindset and movement, because I'm very passionate about the fact that our mind and body are so interconnected. And I love to explore the powerful connection that we have between our minds and our body. Like Gabor Mate said, there is no body without mind and no mind without body. And I believe that if we align the two, we can truly unlock sustained performance, resilience, and drive. And I think that real transformation happens when we address both mind and body together rather than separate entities. So when I do my speaking, I draw on my experience of working with Olympic athletes and high performance people, but also my own journey through overcoming breast cancer. And it's more than just motivating people. It's about equipping them with the tools to perform at their best consistently. So I really went through a period of self-discovery following my cancer. And I really wish that everyone would know the things that I've discovered without having to go through the same levels of trauma. So what I thought I would do is just tell you a few of those key things that I try and spread the message about. The first one is establishing what our values are. How do we value life? What does living mean to us? Like Nietzsche says, He who has a why can bear with almost any how. So I'm not just a physiotherapist, mother, wife, friend, but what do I enjoy doing? Well, I love challenging my mind through thoughtful conversation. I love challenging my body through sporting challenges. I love exploring the world with my family. And I think it's really important that we establish what our values are. It's not just what we do that's important, because if that gets taken away from us through things like injury or illness, well, what then? So alongside discovering what my values are, I also try and be present. Like my first ever guest of the podcast, David Smith, said, be where your feet are. I try and live in the day, and I try not to look too far ahead. I make sure that I enjoy the process, and I try and live every day like it's my last. And if I'm doing something that's not giving me joy, I think long and hard about why I'm doing it. The Olympic athletes that I've worked with that have all achieved medals have all been the ones that are in the moment. They're not thinking about the next competition or the last competition. They are there, fully present on the start line. And this takes us into talking about goal setting. So as a physiotherapist, I've always been a massive advocate of goal setting because we're taught at university to set SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed. But actually, I think what I was doing before my cancer is I was setting too long-term goals. I was always thinking about the future. And so I wasn't in the present enough. I wasn't living for the day. It was always, well, what's coming next? So I now try and set daily attainable goals. And I think this helps me create a winning mentality because by creating everyday goals that you can tick off, suddenly you're achieving so much every day. That doesn't mean I don't set long-term goals as well. So there's always a long-term goal of something I'm trying to achieve, but there's everyday goals to stay present. Alongside staying present, I'm forever grateful. So when we talk about gratitude, I think some people coil away because people think that I'm referring to formal gratitude, like gratitude journals. But the way I practice gratitude, I just feel grateful for things. It's not just the big things, but the everyday, the little things that count. So if I am enjoying a nice coffee that day, I'm super grateful that I'm able to enjoy that coffee. I think an awareness as well that it's not always the big things, but the little things that count has really helped me enjoy the day-to-day and enjoy the little aspects of just living. I feel so lucky to be alive now. And I always say that I'm so grateful that I have the choice to suffer. So when I embark on my sporting challenges, I am so lucky that I am able to put myself in that situation. If I am, for instance, running a marathon and it feels difficult, I take myself back to the fact that I am so lucky to be there. And I have the choice to be here and I've chosen to be here and I'm going to appreciate that moment. And really, this all comes under our mindset, doesn't it? When I was diagnosed with cancer, I never asked why me. I always asked what now? How can I use my cancer diagnosis to help other people? And that's why I'm here today. Through speaking to these incredible individuals who have just fantastic mindsets, I've learned so much. So one Olympic athlete said to me, she used to go to her training and think, I have to do this every day. But then her mindset shifted to her now saying, wow, I get to do this every day. And then there was Martine Wright, who was the most injured survivor of the 7/7 attacks. And she lost both her legs. But she says, I wouldn't go back in time. My life is enriched. And then David Holmes, who was Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double in the Harry Potter franchise, he says how he believes that bad things happen to good people because they are strong enough to be able to deal with them. Through my podcast and through making videos like this, I have found strength in my vulnerability. I never would have thought that I could look at a camera and speak to you about these things that really, really mean quite a lot to me personally. But I found strength from it. And sometimes I think it's really important for us to actually talk openly about these things that we find challenging, because when we lock them up, that's when things become difficult. And I've just found so much strength from talking about it. And I have always said, if I can help just one person listening, then it's worth it. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope that if you have a curveball thrown at you, you can take it and use some of these tips to help you face that situation head on and with positivity and resilience. If you enjoy watching this video, please do subscribe for more content and let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and if you've been through difficult situations and feel that you've come back stronger from it.